Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
What can you do when faced with a conflict avoidant leader? And what if your conflict avoidant leader is not dealing effectively with abrasive and bullying behaviors demonstrated by those that report to them? As part of our Workplace Bullying and Harassment series, Rachel Schaming will explore the conflict avoidant leaders, symptoms, and support. In this fast-paced discovery conversation, we will explore how to work with and support leaders with avoidant personality symptoms. Walk away with insight and techniques to master this frustrating phenomenon in the workplace and personal relationships. Now, our guest, Rachel Schaming, is an organizational and individual change leader, accomplished senior human resource professional with over 30 years of proven success in leading people, processes, symptoms, and cultures in innovative change initiatives. Rachel's career has included positions at NASA in Houston, the Texas Medical Center, 2 New York City law firms, and a high-tech company. Rachel speaks internationally on organizational management concerns, and her international coaching practice focuses on coaching abrasive leaders and managers. I've been honored to meet Rachel in person last year as part of the Boss Whispering Institute, and I'm so impressed with her background, expertise, and what she has to share. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Patty. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, I am super excited because you and I both have a topic that we're passionate about. I mean, we talked a lot about, in the past in our meeting around abrasive leaders, but one thing that we tapped into is this conflict avoidant leaders. I mean, I get so many people who are like, you're going to talk about conflict avoidant leaders? That's so huge in our organization. So I guess I want listeners to really understand what led you to be curious about conflict avoidant leaders.
Well, I'd have to say personal experience, as you were reading off or talking about the places where I've worked. Early in my career, when I started at NASA, I began to, of course, appreciate astronauts and programmers and engineers, the highly, highly intelligent people. And yet I would notice that occasionally when some tough thing came up, usually a people issue, there would be avoidance or minimizing or some kind of distraction away from that issue. Then I noticed the same thing with physicians and with lawyers and then in a high-tech company, and I thought, okay, what's the common thread here across these industries where I have been? And I also noticed simultaneously that I personally was feeling helpless and disempowered. I could see that there were issues that needed to be addressed as an OD, an organizational development practitioner, and HR practitioner, and yet I would bump up against these conflict avoidant leaders. So the end result early on, until I began to study this and think about it more, was frustration and feeling like I'm not really measuring up. There's something I'm not doing. So that was kind of where my curiosity began to peak, like what was going on there.
So your personal history and experience was from an HR perspective for the most part.
Yes. Mm-hmm. At one point, I was an executive director in law firms, but a lot of that role still deals with people issues, the strategic planning, that sort of thing. And I would still encounter above me, like at the in the law firm or a physician group, you're dealing with partners who own the business. And yet these brilliant people would struggle when there was a tough situation to deal with.
So let's name then, because you and I have had a lot of experience, so let's name when someone is encountering a conflict avoidant leader. You could be in an HR position, you could be a leader yourself, you could be a peer, a coworker. How do people really know that they really are encountering a conflict avoidant leader?
The first thing they may notice is the leader has a lot of discomfort, and perhaps even to the point of, say you're in a meeting, a regular office meeting, and a bit of a touchy subject comes up. The avoidant leader may change the subject, may cut people off and move on to a completely different topic. I've even seen them leave the room. So the observer will see there's some kind of discomfort going on. They also may see procrastination, like about decisions particularly. Lack of focusing on the decision, a timely way to make decision. Perhaps they are making excuses. The big thing I have noticed is that they struggle with making decisions because underneath this conflict avoidance is an enormous desire to be liked. And that desire to be liked just blocks them from being effective in stepping into, and often it's an unknown. You're stepping into an unknown if there's a conflict, there's an abrasive situation, and that scares them to death. They have enormous anxiety around that.
Now, listeners who are listening to this might be surprised by this enormous need to be liked. Say more about that, because they're like, well, they're presidents, they're CEOs, they're, a partner attorney. I've seen them be brutal. I've seen them, they're brilliant. And then all of a sudden you say, and they hear, what? They need to be liked? What? Say more
and they
about
won't
that.
Say, the conflict avoidant leader certainly won't say, hey, guys, I need to be liked more than anything. So, in fact, they may not even know it. It's the behavior that will show and indicate that is what they truly want. An example might be you and I are on the same team, Patty. You go into the avoidant leader with a request for some kind of equipment. And the avoidant leader says, oh, yes, sure, Patty, that sounds great. I go in to the leader at a different occasion, and I'm asking for some type of resource and funding. And the avoidant leader knows there may be some constrictions with the budget, but he or she will say yes to me as well. Now we are all in a budget meeting, and you and I discover, hey, we've both been given the nod for whatever resource we need, and yet the avoidant leader may say, well, we've got some budget constraints, etc. He or she will not want to disappoint either one of us. But what happens is then we become frustrated and we become a bit disillusioned because of this lack of being able to be decisive, to have candor when you're talking with others in a workplace. Authenticity sometimes is scary to them too. Like sensitivity to criticism. They have, I've seen it in the extreme where there's almost a paralyzation of fear of being rejected. So they will be can be quite charming, quite brilliant, and have this propensity to avoid, because the thought of not being respected, liked, and even adored is so uncomfortable for them.
Okay. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask, if they distribute, if you have a leader who exhibits this pattern, this type of behavior that you've just described, how is that often perceived by others, whether that's the HR person yourself or especially the employees that report to them? How is that perceived? Or even for that matter, labeled?
Well, in the organization, people may become apathetic. Another thing, the avoidant leader will have a very difficult time setting expectations. These are my expectations, and holding people accountable. That will be a little fuzzy for them, because that means I may have to have tough conversations, a candid conversation. And so in the organization, you may start to see some apathy, some disengagement, even disillusionment. People begin to think, no one really cares about me. There's no clear direction here. So they begin to flounder. The biggest area that I've seen that is of concern with avoidant leaders is when they may be supervising or managing an abrasive person. And they will have such a difficult time with that, to the point that because of that avoidance, the organization becomes like a petri dish, if you will, where when the leader is not setting standards and norms of conduct and professionalism, the message that goes out is it's okay to behave any way you want here. So they won't confront the avoidant leader and the abrasive leader.
Abrasive.
And so the abrasive leader continues with their behavior, and eventually in the organization, work groups and targets become extremely disillusioned, like the organizational leader knows this is happening and they're doing nothing. So that betrayal. So it can continue, if you think of it as a continuum. On the surface, it might just be, I just really don't want to talk about that right now, and avoiding a topic. All the way through, we now have a really serious toxic situation, and the avoidance is perpetuating it. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And so let me just, before we go further into this abrasive behavior piece of it, let me let listeners know that you are tuned in to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk Radio program, and we're talking with Rachel Schaming about the conflict avoidant leader, and specifically right now, because this is our workplace bullying harassment series, what happens when a conflict avoidant leader is actually supervising, managing, leading an abrasive leader, and especially when the conflict avoidant leader is not addressing it, and like you said, it becomes a petri dish, and the behavior, it becomes even more toxic, not just toxic between the two leaders, but the employees that are impacted by that, and it becomes this toxic environment. So say more about this, because this is such an interesting dynamic, especially when the abrasive leader reports to a conflict avoidant leader.
Well, what you will see is that no type of intervention will happen at the organizational level when things have now reached an extreme stage. It takes almost something like a lawsuit, some type of really serious formal complaint before it will jar the avoidant leader into taking some kind of action. Whereas in an earlier stage, if the disruptive abrasive person was receiving candid feedback about their conduct with consequences that they need to change, or there will be certain consequences, if that were to happen earlier, like a non-avoidant leader is willing to step out there and say, we need to address this, we are going to follow the policy consistently across every demographic in the institution or company, and that we will hold all people accountable. But with the avoidant leader, it's like an ostrich with the head in the sand. Let's avoid it. Let's make excuses. And now we're at an extreme level where there are serious feelings of betrayal, we'll talk about what are some of the things you can look at other than the behaviors that may begin to tell you a story that something is off, something's going on here.
So let's go there then, because, what happened, as you said, to jar the conflict avoidant leader to take a different action than they've been taking all along. And unfortunately, I don't know how long it's been for you, but sometimes the longest case I've worked on was 15 years. That's a long time for the conflict avoidant leader to get jarred.
Yes.
But it was to the point, like you said, was grievances, lawsuits, sexual harassment, whatever they're naming it. So talk more about what you were just saying. What are the other elements to really be looking for?
Well, when I'm dealing with an avoidant leader, because I know they're petrified, underneath all of this is fear. We didn't quite talk about that yet, Patty, but fear. The internal conversation is, I don't know what to do. This scares me. I'm afraid I won't be liked. A lot of fear, internal conversation. But some of the tools that I use with an avoidant leader are more about data, metrics. I might take a look at, because I have access to that in an HR role, what's the absence trending in this abrasive person's department? Now I'm just looking at data. What are the turnover statistics? What are the transfer requests, like people wanting out of the department? What kind of complaints do we have in general? There might be general complaints like we have poor communication in our department. Well, that means next to nothing to most people. And maybe a complaint would be we don't work well as a team. You can do cost to hire. What are your actual cost to hire? What are your medical insurance claim utilization rates? Any kind of pharmaceutical experience that you can get from your insurance brokers and providers. These metrics will begin to tell a story. It can tell you a story that we have awfully high turnover in this particular department. You might be looking at exit interviews. What employees say when they go out the door may be different than when they're internal. And if you, the HR person or the mediator, have done any kind of intervention where you may have interviewed people in this work environment, there may be key threads that you're picking up, key themes. So that data can be used very early on to help the conflict avoidant leader see, okay, this looks like something's happening. And one of my favorite questions is to ask them, what will be the consequences if we do nothing? And they usually say, well, it's probably going to get worse. It's probably going to mean we lose more employees. And then I might say, how comfortable are you if we go that route, or if you choose to go that route? But I'm helping them by walking beside them versus any kind of judging or criticizing. That won't work with an avoidant person.
So let's go back for a minute, because as you mentioned briefly a couple of times, is this enormous anxiety, and for them some really underlying fear. And there's a number of things that are a little bit different for each, this anxiety about being liked. But say more about this experience of fear and even pain, because I've actually seen the pain in their voice and their faces even thinking about dealing with something like that. Say more about what's motivating that fear.
I think underneath it all is I'm going to fail. And I avoidant leader, I really don't want to fail, because I will, underneath they may feel like an imposter. So something like imposter syndrome is going on, that if you really look below the surface here, you're going to see that I'm not capable or competent in this area. So I don't dive into all of that, but I do provide them with certainly the metrics, but also I position myself as I'm a partner walking with you, and how can I support you? I've even gotten to the point where they will say, well, can you sit in with me while we have this dialogue? And I am okay with that, Patty, as long as they understand they need to do the speaking. I'm there more in a facilitator role because it's important for the abrasive person to hear from their own direct manager. So in that supporting role, helping them find the language, helping them think through what do you think the reaction will be, what will you say then, just a little bit of strategy planning before the conversation, helping them see that it's not awful to be hesitant around conflict. Most people are not comfortable. I guess you and I are the exception, and folks listening in, we enjoy the process of helping people navigate conflict. But helping them see, this is a skill you learn. It's not something that we're born with. And so positioning ourselves with empathy and as a partner, and that we're there to support the process and step by step help them think it through.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more, because you're talking about some strategies from an HR perspective, and probably even because I know that you're a coach. So let's talk about, for those who might be listening in, they could be an HR professional, they could be a coach themselves, or an on-buzz, or an OD, or maybe a leader themselves. What are some strategies that can help the conflict avoidant leader and or the conflict avoidant leader who might be listening to this? What do they do?
I think one of the best strategies, in addition to any metrics that might be available, is simply education. Like, I use a tool, it's actually in table format, and it when you look at the tool, it shows disruptive conduct, like the early stage, escalating, and extreme, and what's happening with the abrasive person, the target, the work unit, and the organization. So I'm particularly focusing on, when this is going on, this is not unusual that we see this minimizing and avoiding, because we're fearful it's going to get worse if I step into it. So now I'm educating them about the phenomena of abrasive behaviors, but I'm also talking with them about, let's talk about what you can do. Do you have a policy for your entity? And if not, let's work on that together. Do you have a process that makes sense logically, where complaints can be filtered? Do you have a robust feedback format where feedback can be given to persons that may be slipping in their conduct? So I'm at the same time that I'm doing the education, I'm positioning myself as I'm walking beside you, and then we're identifying where do we need to do, where can we do some extra work? Is it around education? Is it around the process? Perhaps it's even in leadership skills, like how in the heck do I do feedback? So it's in that area of, I'm not here to tell you how defective you are. I'm here to help you gain some insight into this area. And I usually have great empathy that, you MBA person sitting in this chief operating officer role, you went to school to learn how to run a business, focus a lot on the finances, on getting a product or service to market. And what I have learned is about more the human behavior. So let's see if we can't help each other learn more about these pieces of the business. And I have found when we approach it as a gentle educator versus I am the expert here and you're defective, they begin to gain some insight and real curiosity about how do I get more comfortable with this. Another thing that I always tell avoidant leaders is we're never really comfortable with conflict, but we become more confident. Because as we gain tools and we gain understanding, then we are going to feel more confident, but not necessarily comfortable. I make the distinction between the two.
Well, and, a lot of people, I commonly say you're going to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
With conflict.
Right.
Because we're always going to have that element, but how do we not shy away from it, be scared of it, so that it escalates things to a point of no return? Now,
right.
So as someone who is helping the conflict avoidant leader, if we have someone who says, yeah, I really hate conflict, I'm the president of a company, I have these situations all the time, what would you tell this conflict avoidant listener, a leader who might be listening now, about what steps they could take right now for themselves?
Well, the first thing, I think, is to recognize and have a name for it, like avoidance, that I am conflict avoidant. Okay, fine. I'm also probably labeled in other ways myself. So if I know, okay, I am avoidant, I would request that they think about what specifically is it that causes the huge discomfort. Is it that people won't like you? Is it that a decision might not be well accepted? What specifically is it? So do some soul searching, if you will, about what are the specifics under the avoidance, and then think about if this were to be modified or ameliorated in some way, how would I want to be? How would I want to show up? So now we've created a bit of a gap between where the avoidant leader sees themselves and where they want to be. And then I think if you have someone such as a coach or a mediator who can help the leader take steps, baby steps, to go from avoidance to engagement. And it isn't one big swing and you're over there. We take 2 steps forward, 1 backward, and gradually over time we do gain that confidence. But the first thing is figuring out what specifically terrifies me. And it's usually in 2 areas. I want to be liked and fear of strong emotions, particularly anger. Tears might fall in there because a lot of people just panic when there are tears. But it's usually one of those 2 things, wanting desperately to be liked and then the fear of the strong emotions.
Okay. Now, what I'd like to address from this angle is I've spoken to a lot of HR people who don't have the exposure and expertise as you have in developing the skills and addressing, identifying, and dealing with this. There's a lot of smaller companies with HR professionals who are terrified themselves. They are literally paralyzed when they deal with these situations, whether it's dealing with a conflict avoidant leader or especially abrasive leader. So if we have these HR professionals who are listening in, obviously being paralyzed where they feel like, I don't know where to go, so I don't do anything. It almost perpetuates the whole situation. So I don't know if you've ever experienced that as an HR person early on in your career, but how did you get out of that box? How did you get out of that, your own paralysis, if you experienced that as an HR person in dealing with these situations?
Oh, I did experience it a big time, and it was an awful feeling, that to feel boxed in, knowing in my heart that there had to be a way to navigate this, feeling almost paralyzed myself, a lot of fear, certainly powerless, but wondering at the same time, it felt like I was betraying myself with my ethics and integrity. So one of the early steps that I took, Patty, was learning more about facilitation, just facilitating a meeting, dealing with different kinds of emotions. I had such a curiosity about what if I gain more knowledge about how you deal with strong emotions? Would that help me feel more comfortable? And it did in my case. So I took every class I could find on facilitation, and today there's some great resources electronically. You don't have to, quit your job and go to school forever. There are some easy, although that is tempting at times, but that was a big help to me. And then in my particular situation, I was curious because I was working with lawyers about the process of mediation. So I took classes in conflict mediation, too, to see if I could see any distinctions or any similarities between facilitation and mediation. What I saw was learning to be, in both cases, learning to be more comfortable with strong emotions. And from that, I also realized I feel more courageous if I can step forward that this is what's going on in our organization. These are some issues that I need to escalate upward. Now I'm up against that conflict avoidant leader. And then I begin to develop the language around, let's look at some of the metrics. Let's think about what are the consequences going to be. But it is a step-by-step, and I can't say that I'm done yet. We're ever growing, aren't we, in this area?
Oh, yes. Well, absolutely, and I don't want HR professionals to be also, paralyzed by their own fear of addressing, because really the HR professional, the ombuds person, the OD person, whatever it is you have in your organization, listeners, that can you could really learn not only for yourself, but how you engage and help to intervene to deal with these really, actually very common dynamics in workplace organizations. And not knowing how to deal with it certainly only escalates the situation, and it's really unfortunate that some of them go for years until it is like about to totally explode in a legal way, as you said. And in an early, really recognizing it early on is so critical, not only to recognize it, but to, like you said, take that courage and really either seek the support if you're a conflict avoidant leader, go to your HR person, go to a coach, go to someone that you trust that knows how to recognize human behavior, help you with that. All the various strategies that you mentioned tonight on this program are wonderful examples, but the thing about it is not doing anything is not going to lead to anything that's going to be productive for the whole situation. Now, you've culminated a lot of your years of experience in research and all these wonderful strategies into a recent chapter. So tell us a little bit about this recent chapter you wrote and what is the book called?
Well, I am excited about this. Yeah, you're right. Culminated is the word for it. I have written a chapter about it. The book title is Roadmap to Success, and my chapter is about the conflict avoidant leader. And it's a bit of a long chapter because I have quite a few examples in there. But what led me to be so curious about this was all these years of experience. And then when I was invited by the authors Ken Blanchard and Deepak Chopra to write this part of the book, I thought, I really don't want to pass up this opportunity. So that's what intrigued me to get it down on paper, and the book will be out in about 3 weeks, it looks like now.
Ooh,
so,
hot off the press.
Hot off the presses, yes. So it'll be available with Amazon, so that's also good. But as I was writing the book, I felt... I guess I feel such sadness and empathy for people who are suffering. The avoidant leader, even though initially I had frustration, irritation, all of those negative types of feelings, I've come 360, and I really felt that in writing this chapter. I now view them as a human being who is suffering, how can I show empathy? How can I provide education or data so that I am walking with them? So it's a big shift for me too, Patty.
That's wonderful. You know, after you wrote the chapter, and that takes so much work and thought to think about how do I, synthesize this into a way that people understand. What was really cathartic about writing that, especially reflecting on your years of experience?
Well, part of it was honoring that I did the best I could as a early young person in HR and moving on to OD. I did not know about this. I knew that the feelings, the frustration, etc., but it was about acknowledging I probably did the best I could in the circumstances. And then the determination to keep learning, keep growing, keep reaching out to other people who are also on their journey, and they may also be needing support. So it was cathartic in that way, and also energizing for me to feel that I am just a little bit farther on the path than others who may be earlier in their career. How can I support them? What resources do I have that can help them along the path? And so it's a very satisfying feeling for sure.
Well, you did mention earlier that one of the strategies you use when you were educating the conflict avoidant leader is about a particular tool. Is this a tool that you've created and published that's shareable with the listeners? Is this a tool?
It certainly is shareable. It's not published yet. We believe it will be in the next few months. Happy to share it with anyone.
Another and what way is it called?
It's called the Disruptive Conduct Continuum.
Okay, good.
And it'll have in there about the avoidant leader, and it has everything that is in that whole phenomena. But another way this tool can be used, Patty, is if someone is a target of abrasiveness or a target frustrated with the avoidant leader, they can look at the template and they can point immediately to that's where I am on this continuum. That's what I'm feeling. And at the same time, that is a tool that gives great insight to the HR practitioner that, okay, this is data, this is what this target or work group is feeling. Now let's use that as a data point too. And I usually am not disclosing at all the names of whoever is complaining about behavior simply because we want to protect their confidentiality. But that tool is available, absolutely.
Okay, I'm glad that you said that. I appreciate that. So we're wrapping down, and we usually do some type of an assignment for the week. We are coaches, so we do that, right, or a call to action. So what do you have for our listeners to take the next step?
This is what I want you to do, listeners. I want you to think about an avoidant leader in your life. Perhaps it is a boss. Perhaps it could be a coworker. It might even be someone in your family that you hear complain a lot about decisions they have to make, and there's some concern around that. So think about that avoidant leader, and what one action can you take to lessen their fear this week? Before Saturday, what is one action you can take to lessen their fear? Perhaps it's empathy. It could be education. It could be metrics. It could be something completely different.
Ooh, I love that call to action. So listeners, there you go. And please, we encourage you, if you do this, and you will, to let us know how that goes for you. And you can post on Rachel Schaming's show page at texasconflictcoach.com, on our Facebook page, or let Rachel know directly. So how can they reach you, Rachel?
The best way to reach me is through my website, and that is www.rachelschamming.com. RachelSchammingCoach.com, sorry. Let me spell that. RachelSchamming Schaming, coach, COACH.com.
Okay, excellent. And so they can find whatever contact information there. So if they wanted to ask for the Disruptive Conduct Continuum tool or any other support, they can find out about your book there and or
Yes.
ask for this tool, a copy of the tool and permission to use it at your website.
They can, and I have tons of articles. Anything that I can do to support, please just ask. Happy to share.
Wonderful. This has been wonderful having you on the program and ending our workplace bullying and harassment series, and I am so honored to have you. I've learned so much from you just in the last year, meeting you at the Boss Whispering Institute Symposium, our work together that we do on abrasive leadership, and you do so much work, you know, and even in higher education arena, and there's so much that you do that people don't even realize, and they'll find out through your website and the work that you do and in your chapter. What final message, Rachel, would you like to leave with listeners?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the privilege of being with you, Patty. It's been such a pleasure. And here is my final message, and it's in the form of a question. What can I do to lessen the anxiety this leader is feeling? And what will your action be?
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, everyone, this is the end of our Workplace Bullying Harassment series. You'll be able to listen to it over and over and download the free podcast. It will be available to you within 24 hours. And again, Rachel, thank you so much for being part of our series and our program.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.